What is the price of a lie? For the Titan of Finance. Ethan Blackstone, it was his kingdom. He was a man who had everything: a multi-billion-dollar empire, a name that commanded respect, and a beautiful, intelligent wife, Olivia, who was carrying his heir. But he also had a secret, a mistress named Isabella, who he kept tucked away in the shadows of his glittering life. In a moment of careless cruelty, he was recorded telling her she meant nothing. He never imagined that his pregnant wife would find the audio, or that she would choose his 40th birthday gala in front of the city's elite to play it for the world. This is the story of the day the whispers became a roar. The air in the Upper East Side brownstone always seemed to carry the scent of money and peonies. It was a fragrance Olivia Carrington had grown accustomed to over her 5 years of marriage to Ethan Blackstone. It was the smell of security, of a life curated to perfection, a life that was now finally complete. Her hand rested instinctively on the gentle swelling curve of her stomach where their son, the future of the Blackstone dynasty, was growing. From the bay window of their library, Olivia watched the autumn leaves in hues of amber and gold dance their way down onto the pristine pavement of the private garden. Everything in her world was beautiful, ordered, and immensely valuable. Just like the collection of 18th century first editions that lined the mahogany shelves around her, or the formidable portrait of Ethan's great-grandfather, Tiberius Blackstone, that lorded over the marble fireplace. The Blackstones didn't just own things, they possessed legacies. Ethan was the pinnacle of that legacy. At 39, soon to be 40, he was the charismatic, razor-sharp CEO of Blackstone Capital, a private equity firm that played with corporations the way a chess master plays with pawns. He had inherited the firm from his father, but it was Ethan's ruthless vision that had quadrupled its value. He moved through the world with an unshakable confidence that Olivia had once found intoxicating. It was the confidence of a man who had never been told no, a man whose desires manifested into reality as if by divine right. Their love story had been the stuff of society pages. The brilliant, beautiful art curator from a good but not grand family, and the billionaire prince of New York finance. He'd pursued her with a single-minded intensity that had left her breathless. He'd bought the gallery next to hers just to have a reason to see her every day. He'd filled her apartment with rare orchids and whispered promises of a future that seemed too dazzling to be real. He had made her feel like the only woman in the world, and for years she had been. Their life was a seamless tapestry of glamorous galas, weekends in the Hamptons, and quiet domestic evenings where he would rest his head in her lap, the weight of his empire momentarily forgotten. He'd always called her his anchor, his true north. The pregnancy had elevated her status from cherished wife to something almost sacred in his eyes. He was tender, almost reverent. He'd personally overseen the design of the nursery, a celestial-themed wonderland in shades of midnight blue and silver. He would talk to her belly, his deep voice vibrating through her, telling their son about the legacy that awaited him. "He'll have your eyes," Liv Ethan had said just last night, his hand tracing the outline of her jaw. And my killer instinct. He'd meant it as a compliment, a blessing. But lately a tiny disloyal tremor of unease would skitter down her spine when he said things like that. The first crack in the perfect facade had been almost imperceptible. A few months ago it was the late nights at the office, becoming later punctuated by quick, almost dismissive texts. "Closing a big deal. Don't wait up." Then it was the scent on his suit jacket one evening. Not the heady, expensive fragrance of another woman's perfume, but something more insidious. The absence of his own familiar scent replaced by the sterile, anonymous smell of a hotel room shower. When she'd mentioned it, he'd laughed it off. Had to use the gym shower at the office. The team pulled an all-nighter and I smelled like stale coffee. It was plausible. Ethan was a master of plausible explanations. Then came the new phone. He'd always been a loyal iPhone user, their lives seamlessly synced through the Apple ecosystem. Suddenly he was carrying a second sleek Android phone. For international markets, he'd explained tapping the dark screen. The encryption is better for sensitive communications from the Asian markets. He'd made it sound like a matter of national security, and she, wanting to believe him, had accepted it. But the real undeniable fissure appeared on a Tuesday. Ethan had left for the office early, and Olivia was enjoying a quiet breakfast when a notification pinged on the household's shared iPad. It was a calendar alert from an account she didn't recognize, labeled simply IR. The event was for that evening at 7 p.m. Anniversary dinner, Le Bernardin. Her heart had done a slow, painful lurch. Their anniversary wasn't for another 3 months. She tapped on the event details. The notes section contained a single chilling sentence. "A year since our first meeting. Can't wait to celebrate E." E. The letter hung in the air, electric and damning. Olivia's hand trembled as she took a screenshot, her mind racing. Who was IR? And what anniversary was she celebrating with her E? She spent the day in a fugue state, the beautiful ordered world of her brownstone suddenly feeling like a stage set. The peonies seemed to mock her with their ostentatious beauty. The portrait of Tiberius Blackstone looked down with cold, judging eyes. She was a Carrington, soon to be the mother of a Blackstone, and she was being made a fool of. That evening when Ethan came home, he was carrying a single perfect gardenia. For my beautiful wife, he'd said, his smile as brilliant as ever. "I know things have been crazy at work, but I wanted you to know I was thinking of you." She'd wanted to scream. She'd wanted to throw the Le Bernardin reservation in his face. But the cool, collected part of her, the part that knew how to appraise the value of a piece and spot a forgery, took over. An outburst would give him the advantage. He would twist it, deny it, and make her feel like the crazy hormonal pregnant woman. She needed more than a suspicion. She needed proof. So she smiled, accepted the flower, and inhaled its sweet fragrance. "It's beautiful, Ethan." "Thank you." As he went upstairs to shower, she checked his suit pocket. Tucked inside the breast pocket was a receipt. Not from Le Bernardin, but from a much more discreet, much more intimate French bistro downtown called La Lanterne Secrète. The timestamp was 9:47 p.m. He had managed to have 2 dinners in one night, one to celebrate an anniversary with IR, and a quick obligatory stop to pick up a flower for his wife on the way home. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. It wasn't just deceit, it was a logistical masterpiece of betrayal. That night, as he slept soundly beside her, his hand resting on her stomach, Olivia Carrington made a vow. She would not be the weeping, hysterical wife. She would be the curator of his downfall, and she would use the same meticulous, patient skill she used to acquire rare art, to acquire the one thing she needed, undeniable, irrefutable truth. The performance of the perfect happy couple would continue, but the audience had changed. It was now just her, and she was watching his every move. Isabella Rossi considered herself a student of power. She had arrived in New York from a middle-class Italian family in Chicago with a summa cum laude degree in economics, an unshakable ambition, and a hunger to prove she belonged in the rooms where the world was shaped. Blackstone Capital was not just a job. It was the ultimate arena, and Ethan Blackstone was its gladiator king. From her desk in the open-plan analyst pool on the 48th floor, she'd studied him. She watched the way he commanded a boardroom, the effortless shift from charming to ruthless, the way seasoned executives twice his age deferred to his judgment. He was everything she aspired to be: powerful, respected, and untouchable. Their first real interaction had been 6 months into her tenure. She'd stayed late to finish a deep-dive analysis on a potential tech acquisition, and he'd found her in the deserted office, a single lamp illuminating her workstation. "Rossi, right?" He'd said, his voice smoother than the aged whiskey he was known to favor. He leaned against her desk, not invading her space, but commanding it. "I read your preliminary report. You found the liability clause in Section 4C that my entire senior team missed. That's good work." The praise had warmed her more than any bonus check could. "Thank you, Mr. Blackstone. I just followed the data trail. Call me Ethan." He'd smiled, and it felt like the sun coming out from behind the clouds. "Good instincts are more valuable than good data. You have them. Let's talk more tomorrow." That talk turned into a mentorship. He would call her into his glass-walled office ostensibly to discuss market trends, but the conversations would drift. He asked about her ambitions, her background, her life. He made her feel seen in a way she never had before. He was grooming her not just for a corner office, but for a place at his side. The affair began not with a sordid fumble, but with a calculated seduction. It was a business trip to London. After a grueling day of meetings, he'd invited her for a drink at the hotel bar. He spoke of the immense pressure he was under, the loneliness of being at the top. He painted a subtle picture of his home life, one of respect and duty, but devoid of the intellectual spark he claimed to have found with her. "Olivia is a wonderful woman," he'd said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "She's the perfect wife, the perfect hostess. She's the mother of my child. But she doesn't understand this world, the blood and the thrill of it." "You do, Isabella." And in that moment, Isabella had felt a surge of triumph. She wasn't the other woman. She was the only woman who truly understood him. She was his intellectual equal, his partner in ambition. The pregnant wife at home was a symbol of his public life, his dynasty. But she, Isabella, was the partner to his soul. Their first kiss in the hushed quiet of the hotel elevator felt inevitable, a confirmation of what had been building for months. It was electric, addictive. He made her feel like the most important person in his world. Back in New York, they perfected their secrecy. The second phone, the encrypted messaging apps, the discreet restaurants in neighborhoods he never frequented with his wife. Isabella reveled in the stolen moments, the secret language they shared. She convinced herself that this was a prelude to something more. He was waiting for the right time after the baby was born to make the transition. He was building a case. He told her to extricate himself from his gilded cage without destroying the family legacy. But as the months wore on, a creeping insecurity began to take root. His mentions of Olivia became more frequent, tinged with a paternal tenderness that grated on Isabella's nerves. He would show her a sonogram picture with a proud, foolish grin, or talk about assembling a crib. "It's important to maintain the image of stability until the baby is born," he would explain when she questioned him. "For the company. For the inheritance. It's all strategy, Isabella. You, of all people, should understand that." She tried to. She was a strategist, after all. But her heart was becoming less and less strategic. The anniversary dinner at Le Bernardin was supposed to be a turning point, a year since that first meeting in the office. She had seen it as their real anniversary, a defiant celebration of their connection. The evening had started perfectly. He was charming, attentive, showering her with compliments. He gave her a stunning pair of diamond earrings from Tiffany's, a clear symbol that she was more than a fling. Emboldened, she'd pushed for more. When Ethan, she'd asked, her voice low and intense, "When are you going to tell her I can't keep living in the shadows? I love you. I want a real life with you." His expression had shifted, the warm lover replaced by the cool CEO. "We've talked about this. The timing has to be perfect. After the birth, when things have settled, she'll have your son. That won't make things simpler. It will make them more complicated. You'll be tied to her forever. Olivia and I will always be tied together because of this child," he'd said, his voice hardening slightly. "That's a reality you have to accept." "And what am I?" She'd pressed, her voice trembling with a mixture of love and frustration. "What do I have to accept? That I'm your dirty little secret?" That's when he'd reached across the table, his grip on her hand surprisingly firm. His eyes were cold, calculating. He was placating a restless asset. And it was then he'd uttered the words that would become his undoing. Unbeknownst to him, his sleek, expensive car was parked in a garage 2 blocks away. Olivia had been tracking its location for weeks via the GPS device she'd had her private investigator discreetly install. And earlier that day, while the car was at a detailer's, another operative had placed a tiny voice-activated recording device inside, nestled deep within the passenger side door panel. Olivia wasn't sure what she would get, if anything. But she knew that men like Ethan became careless in the confines of their expensive toys. The recording from that night would have been muffled, a distant conversation from a restaurant. But Olivia's luck, or perhaps fate, had intervened. Ethan, ever conscious of appearances, had walked Isabella back to his car for a final private conversation before sending her home in a separate Uber. He didn't want them leaving the restaurant together. It was in the hushed, leather-scented interior of his Bentley that the real conversation happened, captured in crystal-clear audio. It was 2 days later that the investigator retrieved the device. He uploaded the audio file to a secure server and sent Olivia the link. With trembling hands, she sat in her silent, sun-drenched library, the scent of peonies thick in the air. She put on her headphones, closed her eyes, and pressed play. She heard the soft thud of the car door, the rustle of clothing, and then Isabella's voice, desperate and pleading. "Just tell me I'm not just a game to you, Ethan. Tell me I matter." There was a pause, a sigh, and then Ethan's voice. The voice she had loved. The voice that had whispered promises in her ear came through, laced with a chilling, dismissive finality. "Don't be dramatic, Isabella. You're smart, you're beautiful, you're an amusement, a wonderful distraction from the tedious obligations of my life. But you have to understand the reality of the situation. Olivia, this baby, that's the dynasty. That's permanence. It's a bloodline. It's business." Isabella started to cry, a soft, heartbroken sound. "So I mean nothing, after all this." And then the final brutal blow, the words that sealed his fate. "Of course you mean something. You mean I don't have to be bored. But you don't mean everything. She means nothing to me in the way you think. My wife, she is my legacy. You are a pleasant diversion. Don't ever confuse the two." Olivia ripped the headphones from her ears, a strangled gasp escaping her lips. The world tilted, the beautiful library walls seeming to close in on her. He had not only betrayed her, he had articulated her entire existence as a transaction. She was not his love, his partner, his true north. She was his legacy. A broodmare for the Blackstone dynasty. And the other woman, the one he supposedly cared for, was an amusement. The pain was a physical thing, a white-hot poker searing through her chest. Tears streamed down her face, hot and silent. She wept for the life she thought she had, for the man she thought she loved, for the child who would be born into this web of lies. But as the minutes turned into an hour, the grief began to cool, hardening into something else. It was a cold, clear, and diamond-hard rage. He had called her his legacy. Fine. He had underestimated her. She was not just a Carrington who had married a Blackstone. She was a woman, a mother, and she would not be dismissed as a piece of a business transaction. She downloaded the audio file, saving it in multiple locations. She looked at the calendar. His 40th birthday was in 3 weeks. The party, a lavish affair she was in the midst of planning, was to be held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Temple of Dender, a monument to permanence and history. More than 200 of the most powerful people in the city and the country would be there to celebrate him. A slow, dangerous smile touched Olivia's lips. It didn't reach her eyes. He wanted to celebrate his legacy. She would give him a celebration he would never forget. She would not be a weeping victim. She would be the curator of his public execution. The performance was about to reach its final, spectacular act. In the 3 weeks leading up to the party, Olivia became the consummate actress. The role of her life was that of the adoring, glowing, expectant mother, and she played it to perfection. The cold, hard knot of rage in her stomach was a secret source of fuel, lending a sharp, crystalline focus to her every action. While Ethan saw her serene smiles and tender touches as a sign of blissful domesticity, they were in fact the calculated maneuvers of a general preparing her battlefield. She threw herself into the party planning with a fervor that impressed everyone, including Ethan's formidable mother, Eleanor Blackstone. Eleanor, a woman who wore her family's dynastic wealth like a suit of armor, had initially been skeptical of the art curator her son had chosen. But Olivia's grace, her impeccable taste, and now her pregnancy with the male heir had won the matriarch over completely. The Temple of Dender. Olivia, It's a masterstroke, Eleanor had said over tea, her sharp eyes scanning the calligraphed invitations. Celebrating 40 years of Blackstone leadership in a place that has stood for millennia. The symbolism is perfect. I thought so too, Olivia replied, her voice smooth as silk. Ethan's life is about building things that last. His legacy. It deserves a worthy backdrop. The word legacy tasted like ash in her mouth, but she delivered it with a beatific smile. Eleanor patted her hand. You are a true Blackstone, my dear. You understand what matters. Olivia's days were a blur of meetings with caterers, florists, and lighting designers. She oversaw every detail from the exact shade of the hydrangeas to the vintage of the champagne. To the outside world, she was a woman obsessed with throwing the perfect party for the man she loved. In reality, she was meticulously setting a trap. Her most important meeting was with the audiovisual team contracted for the event. A young, eager technician named Leo walked her through the setup, the discreetly placed Bose speakers, the seamless integration for the DJ, and a planned video montage, the multiple large screens that would be hidden behind swaths of fabric until the big reveal. And this is the main input here, Mrs. Blackstone, Leo explained, pointing to a port on a complex-looking soundboard. We can patch in anything with a standard auxiliary output, or connect wirelessly via Bluetooth. Your phone, an iPad, a laptop, you name it. The sound will be pristine throughout the entire hall. Perfect, Olivia said, her heart giving a steady, rhythmic thump. I'm preparing a little surprise for Ethan. A tribute. I'll need to connect my phone just before the speech. No problem at all. Leo beamed, clearly charmed by the idea of a romantic gesture. You just let me know when, and I'll make sure it's ready to go. We'll do a sound check an hour before guests arrive to be sure. She had the weapon. She had the delivery system. Now she just needed to endure. Living with Ethan during those weeks was a special kind of hell. He was more attentive than ever, flush with the success of his deceit. He would come home, kiss her soundly, and rest his hand on her belly, a picture of doting fatherhood. He had no idea she could feel the phantom chill of another woman's presence on his skin. No idea that his loving words were hollow echoes in her ears. One evening he came home with a small velvet box. Inside was a breathtaking diamond necklace, a cascade of light and fire. A pre-birthday present, he said, fastening it around her neck. For the mother of my son. For putting up with me through all the stress of the last few months. Things are going to be calmer now. Olivia met his eyes in the mirror, the cold diamonds feeling like a collar against her warm skin. She saw his reflection, smiling and self-satisfied. He thought he had gotten away with it all. He thought this gift, this gesture, could erase the late nights, the lies, the dismissive cruelty she now knew he was capable of. It's beautiful, Ethan, she whispered, her voice a perfect imitation of awe. I love it. She hated it. She hated him. But the hatred was a patient, cold thing. It could wait. Meanwhile, Isabella Rossi was unraveling. The conversation in the car had shattered her carefully constructed reality. An amusement. A pleasant diversion. The words were a constant tormenting loop in her mind. The diamond earrings he had given her now felt like a cheap payment for services rendered. She had tried to confront him, but he was evasive. His texts became brief, professional. He canceled their scheduled meetings. He was icing her out, treating her exactly as he'd described her, a temporary distraction that had served its purpose. Her ambition curdled into a bitter obsession. He had used her intelligence, her ambition, and her love, and was now discarding her as the permanent part of his life. The baby approached. Her work suffered. The sharp, insightful analyst was replaced by a distracted, emotional woman. She made a critical error on a valuation report, one that cost the firm a significant amount of embarrassment, though not yet money. Ethan had called her into his office, his face a mask of cold fury. "What is this, Isabella?" he demanded, throwing the report onto his desk. "This is sloppy. This isn't you. I've been under a lot of stress," she'd said, her voice shaking. "We need to talk. About us." "There is no us in this office," he'd hissed, his voice dangerously low. "Here you are, an employee, and right now, You are a disappointing one. Get your head straight or you'll be out of a job. Is that clear?" The threat hung in the air, brutal and final. She was nothing to him. Not an intellectual partner, not a secret love, just a disposable employee. The love she had felt for him twisted into a desperate need for validation, for revenge, for him to simply see her as a person he had wronged. 2 days before the party, a crisp, elegant invitation arrived on her desk via interoffice mail. It was an invitation to the 40th birthday gala for Ethan Blackstone at the Temple of Dender, a generic invitation sent to all senior staff and high-performing analysts. It was a courtesy, a corporate obligation, but to Isabella it felt like a deliberate final act of cruelty. He was inviting her to watch him celebrate his perfect life with his perfect wife, the life he had dangled in front of her and then snatched away. She stared at the invitation, her knuckles white as she gripped the thick cardstock. She thought of Olivia Blackstone, the serene, beautiful wife she had only seen in photos, the woman who had everything, the woman who was carrying the child that had rendered Isabella obsolete. A wild, reckless idea began to form in her mind. He wanted her to be a spectator. Fine. She would go. She would walk into his temple of lies and force him to look at her, to acknowledge her existence, even if it destroyed them both. The night of the party arrived on a wave of crisp autumn air. Olivia stood before the full-length mirror in their bedroom, a vision in a custom-made crimson gown by Valentino. The color was bold, a statement of power and passion, and it clung to her pregnant form, celebrating it. The diamond necklace Ethan had given her was a cold, glittering cage around her throat. Ethan entered the room already in his tuxedo and stopped dead. "My God, Liv." He breathed, his eyes sweeping over her. "You are breathtaking." He came up behind her, his hands resting on her shoulders, his reflection appearing next to hers in the mirror. They looked like the perfect couple, powerful, beautiful, impossibly blessed. The king and queen of New York, surveying their domain before the grand ball. "Ready to celebrate my love," he murmured, kissing her temple. Olivia met her own eyes in the mirror. The pain, the rage, the fear. It was all there, swirling behind a carefully constructed mask of serenity. She placed a hand on her belly, feeling the gentle kick of her son. This wasn't just for her. It was for him. To protect him from being raised by a man whose heart was a hollow chamber of ambition and deceit. "More than you know," she said, turning to face him, a brilliant, dangerous smile on her lips. "It's going to be a night no one will ever forget." The Temple of Dender at the Met was transformed. Bathed in golden uplighting, the ancient sandstone monument rose majestically against a wall of glass that revealed the glittering tapestry of Central Park at night. A sea of New York's elite hedge fund managers, tech moguls, politicians, fashion designers, and old money socialites flowed around the reflecting pool, their chatter a low hum of power and influence against the backdrop of a string quartet playing Vivaldi. Waiters in crisp white jackets moved silently through the crowd, their silver trays laden with champagne flutes and exquisite hors d'oeuvres. Olivia was the perfect hostess, a radiant queen in her crimson gown. She moved through the room with an ethereal grace, a hand always resting on her stomach, her smile warm, and her greetings personal. She accepted compliments on the party, on her dress, on her pregnancy, with a humility that felt genuine. Ethan was by her side, beaming his arm possessively around her waist, accepting backslaps and birthday wishes from his peers. He was at the absolute zenith of his world. "Ethan, my boy, you've outdone yourself," exclaimed Richard Sterling, a silver-haired banking tycoon. "And Olivia, my dear, you are glowing. Motherhood suits you." "She's my rock." "Richard," Ethan said, pulling Olivia closer. None of this would be possible without her. The irony was so thick Olivia could have choked on it. She simply smiled and inclined her head. She spotted Eleanor Blackstone holding court near the base of the temple. a regal figure in navy blue Chanel accepting tributes to her son's success as if they were her own. Their eyes met across the room, and Eleanor gave a slight approving nod. The dynasty is secure, the look seemed to say. An hour into the festivities, Olivia saw her. Isabella Rossi. She was standing alone near the edge of the reflecting pool, looking profoundly out of place. She wore a slinky black dress that was perhaps a little too revealing for the occasion, her makeup a little too dramatic. She was a slash of black against the glittering gold and cream of the party. She clutched a glass of champagne, her eyes fixed on Ethan with a desperate burning intensity. She looked like a ghost at the feast. Ethan saw her too. Olivia felt the subtle tensing of his arm, a flicker of panic in his eyes before it was expertly masked. He steered Olivia in the opposite direction towards a cluster of his partners from the firm. "David, good to see you," Ethan boomed, his voice a little too loud. David, his shrewdest partner, and a man Olivia had always found observant, gave Ethan a long look before smiling at Olivia. The party of the decade live, truly spectacular. His eyes, however, held a question. He had seen the brief exchange of glances, the sudden change in direction. The trap was now fully set. All the players were in position. The oblivious king, the vengeful ghost, the watchful court, and the silent queen waiting for her moment. As dinner concluded and desserts were being served, the lights dimmed slightly. The DJ, a celebrity in his own right, took a break. It was time for the tributes. Ethan's business partner David went first, delivering a witty, heartfelt speech about their early days building the company from a small office with leaky pipes to the global force it was today. He ended with a toast to the next 40 years of the Blackstone empire. Next, Eleanor took the stage. Her speech was less personal, more of a corporate address. She spoke of legacy of duty of the Blackstone name as a pillar of the city's financial and philanthropic communities. She praised Ethan's leadership and ended by turning to Olivia. And to Olivia, Eleanor said, her voice ringing with patrician authority, "Who has not only captured our Ethan's heart, but who carries the future of that legacy. We are all so grateful to you." A round of polite, enthusiastic applause filled the hall. Olivia felt hundreds of eyes on her belly. She was the vessel, the symbol. Then it was her turn. Ethan, his face flushed with champagne and pride, helped her onto the low stage. He handed her the microphone and gave her hand a squeeze, whispering, "Don't make me cry, Liv." "I'll do my best," she whispered back, her voice steady. She stood at the podium, the lights warm on her face. The vast hall was silent, expectant. She looked out at the sea of faces, the powerful and the privileged. She saw Ethan looking up at her with adoration. She saw Eleanor, her face a mask of proud satisfaction, and in the back in the shadows she saw Isabella, her face pale and tear-streaked. "Good evening, everyone," Olivia began, her voice clear and calm. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate my husband. The man you know as Ethan Blackstone, the titan of industry, the brilliant strategist." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "I know him as the man who reads to our son every night, his voice a low rumble against my stomach. The man who makes me laugh when the weight of this city feels too heavy. The man who promised me a lifetime of honesty and love." Her eyes locked with Ethan's. His smile was so wide, so full of love. He had no idea. "I had a video montage prepared," she continued, gesturing to the large fabric-draped screens. "Clips of his childhood. Our wedding moments of triumph. But I realized that a life isn't just about the pictures we show the world. It's about the quiet moments in between. The private conversations that reveal true character." She reached into the small, elegant clutch she was carrying and took out her phone. Her hand was perfectly steady. She saw Leo, the AV technician, standing by his soundboard, giving her a thumbs up. He thought he was about to cue a love song. "I have something I'd like to share," Olivia said, her voice dropping slightly, drawing the crowd in. "It's a recording, a private moment, but one that I feel truly defines the man we are celebrating tonight. It speaks to his priorities. to his profound understanding of what legacy truly means. She swiped her thumb across the screen of her phone, her Bluetooth connection already established. A flicker of confusion crossed Ethan's face. This wasn't in the plan. Eleanor leaned forward slightly, her brow furrowed. Olivia held the microphone close. "Happy birthday, Ethan," she said, her voice suddenly as cold and sharp as ice. "This is for you." She pressed play. For a heart-stopping second there was only silence. Then the sound of a car door closing filled the vast, hallowed space, amplified to perfection by the state-of-the-art sound system. It was intimate, immediate, and utterly jarring. Then came Isabella's voice, trembling and desperate, echoing through the Temple of Dender. "Just tell me I'm not just a game to you, Ethan. Tell me I matter." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Phones previously hidden began to emerge. Ethan's face went from confusion to sheer stark terror. He started to rise to move towards the stage, but he was frozen in place, a statue in a tuxedo. Then his own voice. Smooth, dismissive, and amplified for 200 of his closest friends and colleagues to hear. "Don't be dramatic, Isabella. You're smart, you're beautiful, you're an amusement, a wonderful distraction from the tedious obligations of my life. But you have to understand the reality of the situation. Olivia, this baby, that's the dynasty. That's permanence. It's a bloodline. It's business." The words hit the room like a physical blow. The silence was absolute, profound. Every eye was now on Ethan, whose face had drained of all color. He looked at Olivia, his expression a mask of horror and disbelief. She stared back, her face impassive, her eyes holding his. Then came Isabella's muffled sob, followed by her heartbroken question, a ghostly whisper that filled every corner of the hall. "So, I mean nothing." After all this, Olivia let the question hang in the air for a beat, letting the humiliation sink in, letting every person in that room understand the depth of the betrayal. She watched as people turned to look at Isabella, who was now fully illuminated by the horrified stares of those around her, her face a mess of streaming mascara. She looked like she wanted the ground to swallow her whole. And then Olivia played the final line, the kill shot. Ethan's voice cold and clinical, sealing his own coffin. "Of course you mean something. You mean I don't have to be bored. But you don't mean everything. She means nothing to me in the way you think. My wife, she is my legacy. You are a pleasant diversion. Don't ever confuse the two." Olivia pressed stop. The silence that followed was more damning than any scream. It was a vacuum sucking all the air, all the prestige, all the power out of the room. In that moment, Ethan Blackstone was no longer a king. He was just a man stripped bare and publicly flayed by his own words. Olivia looked at him, her husband. His mouth was open, his face a grotesque mixture of rage and shame. Then she looked at her mother-in-law. Eleanor Blackstone's face was white, her lips a thin, bloodless line. Her fury was not directed at Olivia. It was directed at her son, the fool who had threatened the one thing she held sacred, the family's reputation, the dynasty. With a calmness that was terrifying to behold, Olivia leaned into the microphone one last time. As you can hear, she said, her voice ringing with the clarity of a bell, "My husband is a man who truly values his legacy." She placed the microphone carefully back on the podium. She turned, and without a single backward glance at the carnage she had wrought, she walked off the stage. Her crimson dress flowed behind her as she moved with purpose through the stunned, silent crowd. The sea of powerful people parted for her as if she were Moses and they the Red Sea. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She walked with the unshakable dignity of a queen who had just saved her kingdom by burning it to the ground. She walked out of the Temple of Dender, out of the museum, and into the cool night air of New York City, leaving the smoking ruins of Ethan Blackstone's life behind her. She was no longer Olivia Blackstone, wife of a titan. She was Olivia Carrington, and she was free. The moment Olivia stepped out onto the grand marble steps of the Met, the silence inside the Temple of Dender shattered. It was not a sudden explosion, but the splintering crack of a frozen lake giving way. The first sound was a woman's sob. Isabella Rossi, who turned and fled, pushing her way through the stunned guests. her face a mask of utter humiliation. The next sound was the scrape of a chair. Eleanor Blackstone rose to her full, formidable height. Her face was a study in controlled fury. She didn't look at the crowd, at the whispering guests who were now frantically murmuring into their phones. Her ice-blue eyes were fixed on her son. Ethan was still frozen by the stage, his face pale and slack. He looked like a man who had been struck by lightning. Ethan, Eleanor's voice was not loud, but it cut through the rising chaos like a shard of glass. It was a command, not a plea. He didn't respond. He seemed incapable of movement. It was David, his business partner, who finally acted. He strode to the stage, grabbed a visibly shaking Ethan by the arm, and said in a low, urgent tone, "We're leaving, now." He practically dragged the shell of Ethan Blackstone out through a service exit, away from the prying eyes and the nascent glow of smartphone screens recording his disgrace. The party was over. The most celebrated event of the New York social calendar had become its most notorious scandal in the space of 60 seconds. Guests fled as if from a fire, not wanting to be associated with the fallout, yet desperate to be the first to spread the story. The gossip was already spreading through the city's elite like a contagion. By the time Olivia's car was crossing Central Park, the name Ethan Blackstone was synonymous with a new spectacular kind of self-destruction. Olivia had directed her driver not to the Upper East Side brownstone, but to the Carlisle Hotel. She had booked a suite there 2 weeks ago under her maiden name. Her assistant, sworn to secrecy, had already moved a week's worth of clothing, her personal documents, and the contents of her private safe to the hotel. She had planned her exit with the same precision she had planned the party. Once inside the quiet, opulent suite, the adrenaline that had sustained her for weeks finally began to recede. Her legs felt weak, and she sank into an armchair, her hands protectively cradling her belly. She hadn't just exposed a cheating husband. She had detonated a bomb in the center of her own life. The debris was yet to settle, but for the first time in months, she could breathe. There were no more lies to maintain, no more performances to give. There was only the truth, stark and terrible, and in its own way clean. Her phone began to light up, a frantic, incessant flashing. Ethan, 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 voicemail, text, voicemail. She ignored it. Then came the calls from her own parents, from her friends, and predictably from Eleanor Blackstone. She answered only one call from her lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Helen Reed, whom she had retained the day after hearing the audio. "It's done," Olivia said, her voice weary but firm. "I saw the first alerts from page 6 10 minutes ago." Helen replied, her tone a mixture of professional admiration and concern. "They're calling it the Sermon at the Temple." "Are you all right?" "I'm safe. I'm at the Carlisle. He doesn't know I'm here." "Good. Stay there. Do not speak to him. Do not speak to his mother. Speak to no one. I'll file the divorce papers first thing in the morning. We'll be citing irreconcilable differences, but I'll be attaching a sealed affidavit with a transcript of the recording. He won't fight us on a single term." For Ethan, the night was a descent into a nightmare. David drove him back to the silent, empty brownstone. The scent of Olivia's peonies still lingered in the air, a ghostly reminder of the life he had just annihilated. He was numb at first, but then the rage came, a hot, impotent fury directed not at himself, but at Olivia. How could she? In public, in front of everyone. He called her phone again and again, each unanswered ring a fresh spike of panic. He left rambling, pleading, and then furious voicemails. "Liv, pick up the phone. We need to talk about this. You don't understand. How could you do this to me, to us, to our family?" "This was a private matter, Olivia. I am begging you. I love you. That recording, it was taken out of context. I was just trying to get rid of her." But his pleas vanished into the digital ether. The real reckoning came with a phone call from his mother just before dawn. "You are a fool." Eleanor's voice was devoid of any maternal warmth. It was the voice of a CEO addressing a catastrophic liability. "You have made the Blackstone name a laughingstock. You have jeopardized not only your marriage but this company. The board is convening an emergency meeting tomorrow morning. They will be discussing your position as CEO. Mother, I can fix this, Ethan stammered. Fix this? She scoffed. The video of your public humiliation is the #1 trending topic on Twitter. The stock for Sterling Blackstone Holdings, our biggest public-facing fund, is projected to open down 15%. You haven't just cheated on your wife, Ethan. You have violated the cardinal rule. You embarrassed the family. You embarrassed the money. There is no fixing that. There is only containment. The fallout was swift and brutal. The next day, Blackstone Capital announced that Ethan Blackstone was taking an indefinite leave of absence for personal reasons. David was named interim CEO. It was a corporate execution carried out with ruthless efficiency. The king had been deposed. The social fallout was just as devastating. He was a pariah. Friends stopped returning his calls. Invitations were rescinded. He was unceremoniously removed from the boards of 2 major charities. He was trapped in the gilded cage of his brownstone, a prisoner of the scandal he had created. Isabella Rossi fared little better. She was fired from Blackstone Capital the next morning for conduct unbecoming of an employee. Her name and face were splashed across tabloid websites labeling her the billionaire's amusement. She was publicly shamed, her career in finance in New York effectively over. In his selfish cruelty, Ethan had destroyed 2 lives in addition to his own. Olivia, meanwhile, remained ensconced in her hotel suite, a calm island in the center of the hurricane. Helen handled everything. The divorce petition was filed. The terms were non-negotiable. Olivia would receive a settlement so large it made even seasoned legal analysts gasp full ownership of the brownstone and sole physical and legal custody of their unborn child. Ethan was offered limited supervised visitation rights contingent on his ongoing therapy for narcissistic personality disorder, a clause Helen had added with particular relish. Ethan, broken and facing pressure from his mother, and the board had no choice but to sign. To fight would only mean the public release of the audio transcript and court documents prolonging the agony and the scandal. 2 weeks after the party, Olivia walked out of the Carlyle not as a victim, but as one of the wealthiest single women in New York. She didn't return to the brownstone, which she immediately put on the market. The scent of peonies and lies was too strong. Instead, she bought a stunning, light-filled penthouse in Tribeca with panoramic views of the Hudson River. It was a space that was entirely her own, with no ghosts of the Blackstone legacy. She focused on 2 things: her art gallery, which saw a surge in interest from a public fascinated by her story, and her impending motherhood. She was no longer preparing a nursery for a Blackstone heir. She was preparing a home for her son, a boy she would raise to understand that character was more valuable than capital, and that love was not a transaction. She had lost a husband, but she had gained herself. And in the quiet solitude of her new life, she knew with absolute certainty that she had made the winning trade. 5 years passed. The New York City skyline changed as it always does, and so did the fortunes of those who lived within it. The sermon at the temple had faded from a blazing headline into a legendary piece of New York gossip, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties about the spectacular fall of a titan. Ethan Blackstone never recovered his throne. After a year on leave, he was formally bought out of his family's company, a golden parachute that felt more like a lead weight. His partner David, with Eleanor Blackstone's quiet backing, had successfully rebranded the firm, steering it into calmer, more stable waters. The Blackstone name endured, but Ethan's chapter was firmly, irrevocably closed. He drifted for a time, a ghost haunting the edges of the world he once commanded. He dated a string of younger women, but the relationships were hollow, transactional. He had learned nothing from his downfall, only bitterness. He saw his son Theo Carrington twice a month for 2 hours in a supervised playroom as stipulated in the divorce decree. The meetings were awkward and strained. Theo was a bright, joyful boy with his mother's calm eyes and a happy, open smile. He knew Ethan only as Mr. Blackstone, a sad, quiet man who brought him expensive toys he quickly tired of. The connection Ethan had dreamed of, the continuation of his dynasty, was a sterile, court-ordered appointment. Olivia, on the other hand, had flourished. Her gallery, the Carrington Collective, had become a major force in the contemporary art scene. She had a knack for discovering new talent and a reputation for integrity that was unshakable. She had turned her settlement into a savvy investment portfolio, growing her own fortune independent of any man. She was no longer defined by who she was married to, but by what she had built. Her penthouse in Tribeca was a home filled with light laughter and art. There were no imposing portraits of dead patriarchs, only vibrant canvases and the happy clutter of a child's life. She had created her own legacy, one built on resilience, creativity, and a fierce protective love for her son. On a crisp October afternoon, the kind that had once preceded the infamous party, Olivia was at the playground near their apartment pushing Theo on the swings. He was laughing, his head thrown back, trying to kick his sneakers high enough to touch the clouds. "Higher, Mommy, higher!" he squealed. Olivia smiled, a genuine, untroubled smile that reached her eyes. She felt a presence beside her and turned. It was David, Ethan's former partner. They had maintained a cordial, distant friendship over the years, born of a mutual, unspoken understanding of Ethan's character. "He looks happy, Olivia," David said, his gaze on Theo. "He is," she said simply. "It's all I ever wanted for him." "You know," David said, turning to her, "Ethan asked me last week if I thought you'd ever take him back, after all this time." Olivia stopped pushing the swing and looked at him surprised. "What did you tell him?" "I told him the truth," David said with a slight shrug. "I told him that the woman he lost, Olivia Blackstone, doesn't exist anymore. And that the woman you are now, Olivia Carrington, has no use for a man like him." A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched the boy play. David's words settled in Olivia's mind, a perfect summary of her journey. She had walked into that party as a wife prepared to be a victim. She had walked out as herself. She had burned down a gilded cage to build a true home. Theo ran over, his face flushed with joy, and threw his arms around her legs. "I'm hungry, Mommy." Olivia laughed and scooped him into her arms, burying her face in his hair. He smelled of playground dirt, sweet autumn air, and unconditional love. It was the scent of her real legacy. It was the scent of freedom. Looking out over the city that had witnessed her fall and her rise, Olivia Carrington knew that some endings are not really endings at all. They are the explosive, necessary beginning of everything that truly matters. The story of Olivia Carrington is a testament to the fact that true power isn't about wealth or a famous name. It's about the courage to speak the truth even when your voice shakes. She traded a life of luxurious lies for a future built on her own terms for herself and for her son. Her journey from a billionaire's wife to a self-made queen is a powerful reminder that the most beautiful life is the one you build from the ashes of what was meant to destroy you.
Jonathan Harrington was the kind of millionaire whose charm lit up any room he entered. He commanded attention with a single glance, his easy confidence woven into every crisp suit he wore. At his side, Elizabeth, his pregnant, dedicated wife, carried a grace that quietly spoke of loyalty and poise. But lurking in the shadows was Vanessa Reeves, a striking and ambitious mistress he'd fallen for despite all warnings. On the day the divorce papers were finally signed, Jonathan did the unthinkable. He married Vanessa instead. Little did he know, Elizabeth knew a secret that would blow his new marriage apart, and she left smiling. Jonathan Harrington's rise to wealth had been the stuff of business magazine covers and late-night talk show interviews. Born to a middle-class family in Brookline, Massachusetts, Jonathan had shown an early aptitude for finance. After getting accepted into Harvard, where he brushed shoulders with future power players, he threw himself into the high-stakes world of mergers and acquisitions. By 35, Jonathan had made his first million in a deal that even caught the attention of Warren Buffett, who publicly praised his audacity in a shareholders' meeting. This acknowledgement catapulted Jonathan to the center of business gossip columns, painting him as a young superstar in the making. It was around this time that he met Elizabeth Douglas, a bright-eyed social worker from a modest background who had, by coincidence, attended one of his fundraising galas for a children's hospital. Elizabeth was no stranger to the hardships of life. She'd grown up in a family of 6, barely making ends meet. Something about Jonathan's confidence and the way his eyes lit up when he spoke about helping others made her heart flutter. He, on the other hand, found Elizabeth's quiet strength, her resolve to help people even when her own resources were limited, absolutely magnetic. They dated for a year before he proposed, sliding a ring on her finger in front of a cheering crowd at a charity event in New York. The wedding was a lavish affair in the Harrington family's newly purchased Newport mansion. Journalists snapped photos of the bride in her elegant lace gown, tears of joy glistening on her cheeks, while the groom looked every bit the proud millionaire in a sleek black tuxedo. Tabloids ran the headline, "Millionaire Marries Social Worker," alongside gushing pieces about Elizabeth's grace and poise. People began to see them as a model couple, he with his unstoppable ambition, she with her unwavering kindness. Over the next year, Jonathan's career soared. He poured himself into new ventures, tech startups in Silicon Valley, real estate developments in Chicago, and even a biotech firm. Magazines described him as the next big thing, with references to Elon Musk's daring or Bill Gates's philanthropic potential. Meanwhile, Elizabeth worked as a counselor at an underprivileged youth center, devoting her time to forging mentorship programs that changed countless young lives. But behind the scenes, their marriage was not as flawless as it appeared in photos. While Jonathan showered Elizabeth with grand gestures, like surprising her with an orchestra to play at her birthday party or whisking her off to Bali for a weekend retreat, he also began to chase ever more demanding business prospects. He spent increasing amounts of time traveling and entertaining potential investors. Late-night phone calls became common. He insisted it was part of the job. At first, Elizabeth believed it wholeheartedly. She never questioned him because she trusted him. He was her husband, the man who had promised to protect her heart and stand beside her no matter what storms came their way. Yet, in the hush of empty hallways and silent dinners, she sometimes felt something was amiss. A sense of loneliness crept in, hinting that the fairy tale might be eroding at the edges. Before long, rumors began to swirl. Subtle at first, whispers in the boardroom, raised eyebrows at social gatherings. Then, ironically, a front-page splash in a tabloid. Millionaire playboy at it again? Elizabeth brushed it off as malicious gossip. Jonathan had always been faithful. At least, that was what she wanted to believe. But seeds of doubt were planted, and in the months to come, those seeds would grow into a thorny, tangled reality that would threaten to tear their lives apart. Jonathan's days became a blur of power lunches, red-eye flights, and multi-million-dollar negotiations. At times, he seemed possessed by the thrill of it all. Untouchable, unstoppable. Whenever Elizabeth tried to schedule some alone time to reconnect, he'd remind her of a critical meeting or an upcoming investor conference he just couldn't miss. Friends and acquaintances began to wonder if Elizabeth was simply turning a blind eye to keep the facade of a perfect marriage. In a bid to bridge the growing gap, Elizabeth decided to plan a special homecoming dinner for Jonathan. She spent hours cooking his favorite meal, roasted duck with orange glaze, garlic mashed potatoes, and a side of sautéed asparagus. She set the table with their finest china, a wedding present from her late grandmother. Soft jazz filtered through the living room, candlelight dancing on the walls. Elizabeth prayed this evening would rekindle the warmth they once shared. Jonathan arrived home past 9, exhausted from back-to-back meetings. He plopped onto a dining chair, absent-mindedly loosening his tie. Before he could launch into the same old complaint about work stress, Elizabeth took a deep breath and announced, "I'm pregnant." For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Jonathan's expression cycled through surprise, joy, and then apprehension. He embraced her, wearing a forced smile that Elizabeth tried to ignore, attributing his tension to weariness. That night, he promised her a real celebration. Just not then. He was too tired. Yet the pregnancy did little to slow Jonathan's relentless pursuits. He threw himself deeper into his empire-building projects, determined to make an even bigger name for himself. Underneath his professional triumphs, a slow-burning restlessness began to pulse through him. Every time he closed a deal, he felt a fleeting rush, but moments later, an emptiness took hold. It was like chasing a mirage. The satisfaction never lasted. That was when Vanessa Reeves crossed his path. She was a striking brunette in her late 20s, a marketing consultant with a sharp intellect and an even sharper tongue. She strutted into one of Jonathan's cocktail receptions on the arm of an investment banker. Dressed in a sleek black gown, she exuded confidence and allure. Jonathan couldn't help but notice the way her eyes flickered in his direction throughout the evening. Vanessa worked for an up-and-coming PR firm rumored to have ties to big tech. She pitched Jonathan's company on a new brand development strategy. Their initial conversations were all business, meetings in plush boardrooms, guarded flirtations disguised as witty banter. But as they spent more time together, the chemistry between them crackled with undeniable intensity. Elizabeth, meanwhile, battled morning sickness that sometimes stretched into afternoon and night. She visited her doctor alone, waiting on stiff chairs in the clinic, wishing Jonathan were there to hold her hand. She told herself he was busy, that he'd be there for the important appointments. But deep down, a shadow of doubt darkened each day. Whenever he returned home, his mind seemed elsewhere, preoccupied, distant. She worried her pregnancy was more of a burden than a blessing to him, but she tried to push that thought away. As Elizabeth's belly grew, so did her longing for the closeness they once had. But Jonathan buried himself deeper in the high-octane world of corporate life. His phone buzzed continuously, texts, emails, late-night calls. The name Vanessa Reeves appeared more frequently in his schedule. Elizabeth tried to ask him about her once, in passing, and he casually brushed it off. "Just a marketing consultant," he said, with a dismissive wave of his hand. Yet, their marriage bed began to feel colder. Jonathan worked late or claimed he was too tired for any real conversation. He swore he was just pushing through a tough quarter. But Elizabeth sensed something else, something that made her heart tighten. She pretended not to see the suspicious receipts, the overabundance of business dinners, the frequent out-of-town trips. Every time she thought to bring it up, the image of their unborn child flashed before her eyes. She would swallow her fears, convincing herself it was only a phase, that Jonathan would soon come around. Little did she know, events were already in motion, and the life she had built with Jonathan was heading toward a dramatic fork in the road, one that would test every vow they'd ever made to each other. Vanessa Reeves was not the type of woman to settle for mediocrity. Raised in a household that valued glamour over loyalty, she learned early on how to work a room and captivate anyone she met. She was every bit as ambitious as Jonathan, but her tactics were far more cunning. She loved the thrill of a challenge, and Jonathan Harrington was a prize worth chasing. Their encounters shifted from stuffy conference tables to upscale lounges and restaurants. At first, they excused the meetings as essential to finalize marketing strategies. Over martinis garnished with olives, they'd talk business, flirting behind polite smiles. Often, these evenings ended in the glow of streetlights, with Jonathan driving Vanessa home, both of them lingering at her door longer than they should. Within weeks, their business relationship had evolved into something more intimate. Vanessa invited him to after-parties attended by celebrities and influential personalities. She introduced him to her circle of glamorous friends, painting a picture of a life beyond the stable, predictable world he shared with Elizabeth. Each time Jonathan felt a pang of guilt, Vanessa would smile, lean in, and whisper that he deserved more in life, more excitement, more passion. In the swirl of neon lights and champagne bubbles, Jonathan convinced himself that he was simply exploring possibilities, living his life to the fullest. After all, wasn't he the man everyone admired for his boldness? But as the weeks progressed, the line between excitement and betrayal blurred. They began to meet in secret at luxury hotels. Text messages were exchanged at all hours. The euphoria of their affair was a drug, and Jonathan found himself craving the high even though his conscience told him to stop. Elizabeth, in her own quiet world, was determined to keep the marriage afloat. She enrolled in prenatal classes, reading up on holistic birthing methods. She painted the spare room in a soft shade of yellow, picking out furniture that would create a tranquil haven for their child. Whenever Jonathan seemed stressed, she offered back rubs and words of encouragement. Sometimes he'd mumble a quick, "Thanks," but his eyes betrayed distraction. More cracks appeared in their relationship. Elizabeth noticed strange charges on their credit card statements, expensive dinners at times he claimed to be in meetings, a jewelry store purchase she didn't recognize. She even spotted a faint lipstick stain on his collar once, the color a shade she'd never wear. At night, she lay awake, tears soaking her pillow, wondering if she was enough. Jonathan, unable to face the truth of his duplicity, adopted a strategy of evasion. He gave Elizabeth half-baked excuses, claiming everything he did was for the financial security of their growing family. Deep inside, he sensed he was slipping from the man he used to be, a devoted husband who once valued love and loyalty above all else. Friends started noticing the tension. One evening, at a mutual friend's birthday dinner, Elizabeth sat alone, while Jonathan spent most of his time huddled with a group of acquaintances, telling stories of new ventures. She caught him texting under the table, a small frown etched on his brow. When she asked who he was texting, he claimed it was just a colleague. A fleeting sense of shame crossed his features, but it vanished as quickly as it came. Behind the scenes, Vanessa was orchestrating her maneuvers. She showered Jonathan with compliments, fueling his ego. She hinted about a future with him, describing vacations in Monaco and lavish parties in Miami, a shared life free from the mundane responsibilities that came with being married. She played the role of the understanding confidant, someone who got him, who didn't weigh him down with obligations. For Jonathan, torn between guilt and infatuation, the affair felt like a whirlwind of adrenaline that kept him from acknowledging the cracks in his conscience. But as the saying goes, every high has its crash, and the higher the climb, the more catastrophic the fall. Neither he nor Vanessa realized just how destructive their game would become, not just for Elizabeth, but for themselves as well. One chilly October afternoon, Elizabeth decided to take the day off from her usual volunteer work and surprise Jonathan at his office with homemade cookies, a gesture of warmth she hoped would break through the growing ice between them. Balancing a small basket of chocolate chip delights, she passed through the sleek glass doors of Harrington Enterprises. The receptionist greeted her politely, but Elizabeth sensed a flicker of unease in the woman's eyes. Jonathan was in a meeting, or so Elizabeth was told. She took a seat in the plush waiting area, flipping through a glossy business magazine featuring Jonathan's face on the cover. Minutes turned into a quarter hour. Eventually, the elevator doors slid open, and out stepped Vanessa Reeves, hair perfectly coiffed, wearing a fitted cream-colored dress that accentuated every curve. She paused when she saw Elizabeth, a momentary flash of surprise crossing her face. Elizabeth had never seen Vanessa in person before, but intuition flared. Something in Vanessa's smug, knowing smile felt like a silent declaration of war. Clutching the basket of cookies tighter, Elizabeth stood and approached. "You must be Vanessa Reeves," she said softly, forcing a polite smile. "I've heard Jonathan mention you." Vanessa responded with a practiced grin. "Ah, yes, Mrs. Harrington, he's mentioned you too. Congratulations on your pregnancy." The tone was friendly, but Elizabeth detected a hint of condescension. Vanessa's gaze dipped, almost dismissively, to Elizabeth's swelling belly. Before Elizabeth could reply, Jonathan emerged from the conference room, surprise evident on his face to see his wife and mistress in the same space. His posture tensed, but he quickly regained composure. "Liz, what a pleasant surprise," he said, striding forward to greet her with a kiss on the cheek. He turned to Vanessa. "I'll see you back at the office later. Thanks for your input." Vanessa gave them both a parting smile and stepped back into the elevator. Elizabeth attempted to mask her confusion, her heart pounding. She offered Jonathan the basket of cookies, telling him she missed him and wanted to do something thoughtful. Jonathan thanked her, but his eyes flicked to the elevator, worry etched in his features. He ushered Elizabeth into his private office, quickly closing the door behind them. "Listen," he said, clearing his throat. "Vanessa is just a consultant we hired. She's helping us with some brand strategies for our new project. She can be a bit intense, but she's good at her job." Elizabeth nodded, forcing a smile. She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him for the sake of their unborn child, but her instincts screamed otherwise. There was something too familiar about the way Vanessa had looked at her, something that suggested a deep personal involvement with Jonathan. Days later, Elizabeth confided in a close friend, Margaret Turner, a counselor at the youth center. "I'm worried," she admitted, tears brimming. "I can't shake the feeling something is going on between Jonathan and that woman." Margaret listened intently, her warm eyes full of empathy. "Have you considered talking to a marriage counselor, Liz? Sometimes an unbiased professional can help clarify these feelings." Elizabeth nodded. She wanted to do everything she could to save her marriage, but deep down, she feared that if her suspicions proved correct, it would shatter her. That night, she laid awake again, her hand cradling her belly, silently praying for strength. Meanwhile, Jonathan's affair with Vanessa grew bolder. She peppered him with texts and calls at all hours, urging him to break away from his dull domestic life and claim the life he deserved. One morning, Jonathan awoke to an email containing explicit photos she'd sent, with a suggestive line hinting at how he should spend his next business trip. In the midst of all this, Elizabeth discovered she'd been accepted into a specialized prenatal program for couples aimed at teaching mindfulness and stress reduction techniques. Excited, she broached the subject with Jonathan, hoping he'd see it as a chance to reconnect before the baby arrived. He agreed to attend one session, if only to appease her. During that session, the counselor asked them to face each other, place a hand on each other's heart, and express gratitude for the little things. Elizabeth's eyes misted when she spoke about how Jonathan's success had given her the resources to help more people. Jonathan mumbled about being grateful for Elizabeth's support, but the sincerity was hollow, his gaze flicking away when her tears fell. As they left, Elizabeth felt more alone than ever. The cracks in their marriage had grown into a chasm, and Elizabeth, with her heart on the line and a child in her womb, began to realize she might be fighting a losing battle. Yet, she wasn't one to surrender easily. With every breath, she reminded herself of the life inside her, of the love she once shared with Jonathan. She clung to hope, even as the specter of betrayal loomed larger by the day. Vanessa Reeves had an agenda far more calculated than Jonathan realized. She was well aware of Elizabeth's pregnancy. News traveled quickly in social circles, especially when the father was a high-profile millionaire. While Jonathan saw their affair as a thrilling escape, Vanessa saw a jackpot. She dated wealthy men before, but none with Jonathan's clout or potential. She wanted to secure her position in his life, and more importantly, in his bank accounts. She began with small manipulations. Whenever Jonathan expressed concern about his wife's well-being, Vanessa subtly mocked Elizabeth's fragile state, suggesting that perhaps Elizabeth wasn't strong enough to be the partner he needed. She never outright told him to leave his wife. Instead, she planted seeds of doubt, letting them take root in Jonathan's mind. To further entangle him, she proposed that he invest in an exclusive real estate venture she was supposedly helping spearhead. Promising massive returns, she dangled the prospect of prestige and influence. "Just imagine," she purred into his ear one evening at a penthouse party, "you and I at the top of this city's social ladder, owning prime blocks of property, shaping the skyline. It's everything you've worked for, Jonathan." The dream she painted was irresistible to a man addicted to success. Still, Vanessa sensed that Jonathan hesitated, chained by guilt and a sense of obligation to his pregnant wife. So, she upped her game. She made sure her presence was felt in every facet of his life. She'd show up unexpectedly at his office with lunch, always dressed in a way that made heads turn. She emailed him detailed breakdowns of her business idea, ensuring he saw how much she'd done just for him. During late-night rendezvous, she lavished him with praise, making him feel like an unstoppable force. Even Jonathan's business partners began to notice the shift. A few discreetly cautioned him about getting too involved, but he was too far gone in his double life. He wanted Vanessa's excitement, her audacious energy, yet he also wanted to maintain the respectability of his marriage, particularly with a child on the way. He assured himself that he could handle it. Elizabeth, meanwhile, was retreating into her own silent world of heartbreak. She hardly recognized the man Jonathan was becoming, but she still clung to the dream of a happy family. In her quiet moments, she collected her thoughts, writing in a journal about her hopes for the baby and the love she once felt from Jonathan. If he would just snap out of it, she told herself, everything could be saved. A turning point came when Vanessa managed to corner Elizabeth at a charity event. Elizabeth was volunteering as part of the youth center's fundraising committee, helping set up tables and greeting donors. Vanessa arrived on Jonathan's arm, wearing a figure-hugging red dress. Publicly, she was introduced simply as a colleague, but the knowing looks between them told Elizabeth everything. Jonathan barely spoke to Elizabeth the whole night, preoccupied with parading Vanessa among wealthy benefactors, forging new connections. At one point, Elizabeth found herself alone in a hallway, gathering her composure. That's when Vanessa materialized like a phantom. She leaned against the wall, a smirk playing on her glossy lips. "I've heard you're expecting soon," Vanessa said. "Must be nice to know that Jonathan's going to be a father. He's great with children, isn't he?" The question dripped with insinuation. Elizabeth's chest tightened. "Yes. He'll be a wonderful father," she replied, forcing a polite tone, despite the anger burning inside her. Vanessa's expression was smug, practically victorious. "Well, I hope you're taking good care of yourself. Stress isn't good for the baby." With that, she sauntered off, leaving Elizabeth trembling. In the car ride home, Elizabeth confronted Jonathan through tears, asking him outright if he was having an affair. He denied it vehemently, raising his voice in an uncharacteristic outburst. "Why must you always assume the worst?" he snapped, ignoring the tear-streaked look of betrayal on her face. "Vanessa is a critical part of our new marketing push. You have no idea how business works." Elizabeth withdrew, hugging her belly protectively. She realized that no matter how much she wanted to fix things, Jonathan was spiraling into a world that had no space for her. Yet, there was a spark of determination left. If Jonathan was slipping away, she would fight to preserve her dignity, even if it meant letting him go. Unbeknownst to both of them, Vanessa had more tricks up her sleeve. She wasn't satisfied just being the mistress. She craved legitimacy, adoration, and the glittering promise of marriage. And in her mind, she had already begun orchestrating the downfall of Elizabeth Harrington. It was late November when Jonathan received a cryptic message from Vanessa. "We need to talk, urgent." He glanced at the text, nerves on edge, wondering if she was about to drop a bombshell. Perhaps a pregnancy scare, or maybe some business deal gone awry. He left his office early to meet her at a discreet lounge a few blocks away. Vanessa arrived wearing a long trench coat, cinched at the waist, her eyes hidden behind large sunglasses. She slipped into the booth across from him and ordered a glass of Merlot. Without preamble, she began, "Jonathan, I'm tired of playing second fiddle. We need to make a decision about us." Alarm bells rang in Jonathan's mind. He sipped his whiskey, trying to project calm. "What do you mean?" "I've given you every opportunity to be happy," she said, her gaze unwavering. "And yet, you're still going home to Elizabeth. She's pregnant, sure, but be honest with yourself. Are you truly in love with her?" Jonathan exhaled, feeling cornered. He couldn't deny his passion for Vanessa, yet he also couldn't sever the bond with his wife, especially with a baby on the way. It was as if he stood on a precarious cliff, the slightest push sending him tumbling into an abyss. "This is complicated," he managed. "I do care about Elizabeth. She's the mother of my child." Vanessa sneered, her composure cracking. "Care about her all you want, Jonathan, but that won't change the fact that we have something real. And if you're not going to make it official, I might have to look elsewhere." The threat hung in the air like poison. He should have walked away then. But instead, he found himself apologizing, trying to placate her. The conversation ended with a promise that he'd sort out his marital issues soon. That night, he stared at Elizabeth, asleep in their bed, her hand protectively over her belly. Guilt and longing warred in his mind. Meanwhile, Elizabeth was not as naive as Jonathan assumed. She'd hired a private investigator, a middle-aged ex-cop named Walter Green, who discreetly followed Jonathan's movements. Within a week, Walter delivered photographs, Jonathan and Vanessa entering a hotel lobby, leaving hand in hand, sharing an intimate moment in the car. The evidence was damning. Heart-pounding, Elizabeth spread the photos across her kitchen table. Tears blurred her vision. but she refused to give in to despair. She was pregnant, vulnerable, but she was not powerless. She consulted a divorce lawyer recommended by Margaret. The lawyer suggested she gather more evidence before filing. If Jonathan was going to betray her, at least she would secure her child's future. Jonathan's phone buzzed continuously with Vanessa's messages. Some nights, he escaped to Vanessa's penthouse. Others, he stayed at the office, burying himself in spreadsheets and mergers to numb the guilt. His company's board members were beginning to talk. Even his longtime friend and financial advisor, Daniel Wu, took him aside one day. "Whatever's going on in your personal life, get it under control," Daniel warned, "or you'll lose everything you've built." But Jonathan was too entangled in Vanessa's web. Each time he tried to break it off, she'd reel him back with promises or threats. She'd whisper about the incredible future they could share, while also reminding him of how easily she could create a scandal that would ruin him. Stuck in a vortex of lust, ambition, and fear, Jonathan pushed forward as if by inertia. At home, Elizabeth continued to play the dutiful wife, cooking dinners that he rarely touched, updating him on doctor visits he never attended. A new routine set in. He'd mumble excuses. She'd pretend to believe them, all while carefully gathering evidence. She knew confronting him outright would only make him defensive. Patience, she realized, could be her greatest weapon. The tension weighed heavily in the mansion's air. Servants walked on eggshells, noticing the forced smiles, the stony silences. Friends saw less and less of the couple socially, as invitations were often extended to Jonathan plus Vanessa instead of Jonathan and Elizabeth. The dream life they had flaunted for magazines was collapsing, brick by brick. And yet beneath Elizabeth's heartbreak lay a resolute core of strength. She had a child to protect, and she refused to be cast aside without a fight. Even if it meant letting Jonathan go, she'd do it on her own terms. Little did Jonathan realize the magnitude of what was about to unfold. The day Elizabeth would finally stand tall, unveiling truth after truth, and leaving him utterly shell-shocked by the consequences of his betrayal. By the time Elizabeth reached her 8th month of pregnancy, she had all the evidence she needed. The private investigator's photos, phone records linking Jonathan and Vanessa's clandestine meetups, even eyewitness accounts from a few hotel staff who recognized Jonathan. The heartbreak was immense, but Elizabeth channeled her pain into a clear focus: protect herself and her unborn child. One winter evening, she prepared a special dinner at home. She set the table elegantly, placing 2 tall candles in the center. She wore a simple but graceful maternity dress that accentuated her rounded belly. When Jonathan walked in, his tie loose, coat hung over his arm, he paused at the sight of the well-set table. "What's all this?" he asked warily. Elizabeth forced a smile, pushing past the hurt lodged in her chest. "I thought we should have a conversation over dinner." He nodded, trying to recall the last time they'd had a civil meal together. They sat, clinking glasses of sparkling water. The tension in the air was thick, as Elizabeth served them grilled salmon with lemon butter sauce. After a few bites, she said quietly, "Jonathan, I know about Vanessa." She spoke the name plainly, without drama. He nearly choked on his fish, color draining from his face. "Liz, let me explain," he began, but she raised a hand to stop him. She wasn't interested in excuses. Elizabeth pulled out a folder containing the evidence. She handed it to him, her eyes unwavering. "I've spoken to a lawyer. I'm prepared to file for divorce." Jonathan thumbed through the pages, his face contorting into shock and guilt. "You hired someone to follow me?" he asked, half angry. half astonished. "I did what I had to do," she said. "You lied to me for months. You flaunted that woman in public. And I may have a child to raise soon, our child, but that doesn't mean I'll tolerate disrespect or betrayal." Jonathan swallowed hard, tears forming in the corners of his eyes. Part of him wanted to apologize, to plead for forgiveness. But another part, the side influenced by Vanessa's cunning whispers, told him not to show weakness. "Look, Elizabeth, I'm sorry you found out this way. But you have to understand, our marriage hasn't exactly been perfect." Elizabeth's voice trembled only slightly as she cut him off. "Is that supposed to be an excuse?" She let out a shaky breath, placing a protective hand on her belly. "I'm giving you a choice. We can go through with the divorce, or we can try to work on our marriage. But if we try to work on it, you have to end all contact with Vanessa, immediately, irrevocably, and you have to seek counseling with me. Otherwise, I file the papers." Jonathan hesitated, remembering Vanessa's ultimatum and her repeated promises of a thrilling future. He also recognized the gravity of Elizabeth's request. She was his wife, the mother of his child, the woman who had stood by him when he was nobody. But the hold Vanessa had on him was strong, and the idea of losing that rush felt suffocating. "I need time to think," he stammered. He could see the disappointment flicker across Elizabeth's face. Nonetheless, she simply nodded, tears threatening to spill over, and stood from the table. "You have 1 week," she said softly. "By then, I'll expect your decision." With that, she turned and headed upstairs, leaving her untouched dinner plate on the table. That night, Jonathan slept in his study, too conflicted to face his pregnant wife. He tossed and turned on the leather couch, phone in hand, scrolling through messages from Vanessa, reading the latest property deal she dangled in front of him. He thought about his unborn child, the empire he had built, and the public scandal this would unleash if he went through with a divorce. Stress consumed him, as did a gnawing fear of losing everything. 3 days later, he still hadn't given Elizabeth his decision. Instead, he met Vanessa at a secluded bar, telling her about Elizabeth's ultimatum. "I can't keep living like this," he admitted, frustration clouding his features. Vanessa's response was immediate. "Leave her. You said it yourself. The marriage is basically over. Why not finalize it? We can go public and shape a narrative that suits us." She pinned him with a direct stare, then added, "I can give you a life that Elizabeth never could. You know that." In the haze of whiskey and Vanessa's unwavering gaze, Jonathan agreed. He'd divorce Elizabeth. He found himself rationalizing it. Better to end it cleanly than drag out a dead marriage. And he was certain Vanessa was the more exciting choice. "I'll talk to my lawyer," he muttered, ignoring the pang of sorrow in his chest. Soon after, Elizabeth received the news in the form of a curt conversation with Jonathan. He stood rigid, telling her he wanted a divorce. She didn't scream or cry in front of him. She simply listened, nodded, and retreated to the bedroom. Only when she was alone did she allow tears to flow, sobs racking her body as she held her pregnant belly, murmuring apologies to her unborn child for the broken home it would enter. Little did Jonathan realize, the divorce would not be the final act. Instead, it would be the opening scene of a drama that would twist in ways none of them expected, especially on the day he pledged himself to Vanessa, while Elizabeth remained in the shadows, holding on to an explosive truth. The news of Jonathan and Elizabeth's divorce spread like wildfire through high society circles. Gossip columnists had a field day. Millionaire dumps pregnant wife for sultry mistress. While Jonathan tried to manage the narrative, Vanessa embraced the attention, orchestrating exclusive interviews that portrayed their relationship as fated and irresistible. She even hinted that the timing of Elizabeth's pregnancy had been an attempt to cling to a failing marriage, which only fueled tabloid speculation. Elizabeth retreated from the public eye. She needed to focus on her health and the babies. A few close friends rallied around her, offering emotional support and discreet legal advice. But she remained stoic. She refused to beg Jonathan to stay or to make a spectacle of herself in the media. She allowed her lawyers to handle most of the negotiations, ensuring she and her child would be financially stable once the divorce was finalized. In a matter of weeks, the divorce went through, astonishingly quick for such a high-profile couple. Money and influence smoothed out the usual bureaucratic hurdles. Jonathan's team spun the story as a mutual decision, but the tabloids screamed otherwise. Elizabeth's lawyer secured a hefty settlement package, but the heartbreak overshadowed any material gain. Jonathan had barely signed the final documents when Vanessa insisted on a destination wedding. She was hungry for the spotlight and wanted to prove her status as the new Mrs. Harrington. They chose Lake Como, Italy, for its picturesque scenery, renting out a luxurious villa perched on the water's edge. High-profile guests received elaborate invitations embossed with gold leaf. Celebrities, business moguls, and socialites from across Europe and America flew in. Cameras clicked incessantly, capturing Vanessa in a stunning designer gown as she made her grand entrance. Jonathan stood at the altar, looking dapper in a custom-tailored tux. He tried to focus on the moment, ignoring the pang of regret that flickered whenever he thought of Elizabeth. He reassured himself that this was his fresh start, a leap toward a more exciting life. Vanessa glided down the aisle, her smile wide and triumphant. The ceremony was lavish. Flowers imported from Holland, a string quartet flown in from Vienna, champagne from the finest vineyards in France. It was everything Vanessa had dreamed of. Back in the States, Elizabeth watched the headlines in quiet resignation. She was close to her due date and decided not to dwell on Jonathan's public spectacle. Her child's health and her own peace of mind were her priorities. Besides, she had uncovered something that would turn this entire narrative on its head. Vanessa was not who she claimed to be. With the help of Walter Green, the private investigator, Elizabeth had discovered a tangled web of forged documents, shell companies, and bankrupt accounts linked to Vanessa Reeves. It appeared Vanessa had orchestrated elaborate cons on past lovers, siphoning money through dubious real estate deals and marketing ventures. Several of Vanessa's former associates had been swindled, some too ashamed to go public. But now, Elizabeth had a folder of evidence that threatened to expose Vanessa as a fraud. Elizabeth decided to hold on to that folder for the moment, letting the wedding spectacle unfold. She sensed that unveiling the truth at the right time could ensure that Jonathan wouldn't weasel out of his responsibilities as a father. Moreover, she felt it was better for him to discover Vanessa's true nature when he was at his most complacent. After all, if he was brazen enough to marry his mistress immediately after divorcing her while she was still pregnant, perhaps he deserved the harsh lesson fate was about to deliver. And so, in Italy, under the shimmering lights of a grand villa, Jonathan said, "I do," to Vanessa. They exchanged vows in front of a cheering crowd. A high-profile priest, flown in just for the occasion, declared them man and wife. Fireworks lit the night sky, champagne flowed freely, and paparazzi snapped countless pictures for the gossip magazines to devour. But as Jonathan and Vanessa shared their first dance, a quiet storm was brewing thousands of miles away. It was a storm named Elizabeth, carrying the knowledge of Vanessa's lies like a secret weapon. At home in her modest bedroom, Elizabeth held a copy of the evidence in her hands. She gently set it aside, placed a hand on her very pregnant belly, and smiled, a small, knowing smile. She knew the wedding was only an intermission, not the end of the story, and when the final act played out, Vanessa Reeves would wish she had never underestimated the woman she tried so hard to destroy. Elizabeth went into labor a month after Jonathan's grand Italian wedding. She found herself in a private hospital suite, courtesy of the settlement from the divorce. Even though she was alone, except for a few close friends, she felt a surge of both fear and exhilaration. This child would be her anchor, the one pure thing born from a turbulent marriage. Complications arose during labor, prompting an emergency C-section. Margaret Turner clutched Elizabeth's hand as medical staff wheeled her into surgery. Hours later, a healthy baby boy was delivered, and Elizabeth breathed a sigh of relief. She named him James Douglas Harrington, honoring her family name and acknowledging his father's lineage. Jonathan learned of his son's birth through social media. Distorted rumors claimed Elizabeth was in critical condition, though that wasn't true. Still, guilt stabbed at him for not being there. Vanessa suggested he send flowers or a polite message. After all, she rationalized, we don't want the media to think you're a deadbeat dad. But a part of Jonathan insisted on visiting in person, if only to see his child. He arrived at the hospital the next evening, hoping to avoid the paparazzi. Dressed in a discreet hoodie and sunglasses, he found Elizabeth's private room. She was sitting up in bed, cradling tiny James in her arms. The boy's delicate features stirred something in Jonathan, a flicker of paternal love he hadn't expected to feel so strongly. For a few moments, he stood silently, absorbing the sight of his newborn son and the serene strength in Elizabeth's face. Elizabeth acknowledged him with a nod. "You can hold him," she said softly, offering the baby. Jonathan hesitated before gently taking James, supporting his head as he gazed down at his child. A wave of emotion washed over him, momentarily dissolving the tension between them. "How are you?" he asked, voice shaky with genuine concern. Elizabeth nodded. "Tired, but relieved. He's healthy. That's all that matters." A tense silence followed. Then Elizabeth cleared her throat. "Jonathan, you should know. There are things about Vanessa you aren't aware of." He frowned, stiffening. "She's my wife now, Elizabeth. I'm not sure I want to hear—" Elizabeth held up a hand. "Listen to me. I have proof she's been running cons under multiple aliases for years. She's scammed people out of thousands, maybe millions of dollars. She's not the woman you think she is." Jonathan glared, torn between anger and confusion. "Is this some ploy to ruin my marriage?" he snapped. Elizabeth sighed, stroking James's tiny fingers. "Why would I lie? She's done more harm to you than you realize. Check her financial records. Talk to the people she's scammed. Don't let her drag you into legal or financial ruin." Before Jonathan could respond, the door swung open, revealing Vanessa herself. Decked in designer clothes, she looked thoroughly out of place in the hospital corridor. Her expression soured when she saw Jonathan cradling his son. She quickly recovered, turning to Elizabeth. "I heard you were here," she said coldly, "so I came to see if everything was all right." Elizabeth offered a tight smile. "We're fine," she replied, glancing at Vanessa's manicured nails. "Thanks for your concern." Vanessa's eyes flitted to the baby. "So, that's James, I suppose?" She managed a lukewarm smile that didn't reach her eyes. Jonathan found himself shifting uncomfortably, the baby still in his arms. The tension in the room was palpable. Sensing an impending confrontation, Elizabeth's doctor walked in, checking on the new mother. "The baby should get some rest," the doctor advised, ushering Vanessa and Jonathan toward the hallway. Once outside, Vanessa attempted to link her arm through Jonathan's. "Let's go. We should get a drink and talk." But he pulled away, mind still grappling with Elizabeth's words. "Give me a moment," he mumbled, pacing near the wall. Vanessa shot him an icy stare. "Don't tell me you believe her lies. She's desperate to paint me as some villain. She's threatened by our marriage." Jonathan didn't respond immediately. A swirl of doubt had already formed. The problem was, deep down, he knew Elizabeth was not the type to spin elaborate falsehoods. She was the woman who had always been straightforward, sometimes painfully so. "I need proof," he finally said to Vanessa. "Show me your financials. Put my mind at ease." Vanessa's face blanched, but she recovered swiftly. "What do you think this is, an interrogation?" she hissed. "I'm your wife. You're supposed to trust me." "Trust is earned," he shot back, surprising even himself. "If you have nothing to hide, you'll show me." Vanessa's lips tightened in anger. Without another word, she stormed off down the hallway, leaving Jonathan behind, torn between the newborn son he felt drawn to and the woman he had chosen in a haze of infatuation. If Elizabeth's allegations were true, his entire world was about to explode, and if they were false, he risked alienating his new wife. Caught in the middle, Jonathan could only stare at the hospital corridor, uncertain which direction to follow, and which choice would haunt him more. After leaving the hospital, Jonathan found himself haunted by Elizabeth's revelations about Vanessa. He pushed for answers, combing through public records and discreetly checking with his legal team. At first, they uncovered nothing alarming, mostly because Vanessa had been careful. But a few well-placed phone calls to her supposed real estate partners yielded conflicting stories. Some claimed never to have heard of her. Others said she'd disappeared after complicated deals. The puzzle pieces began to align. Meanwhile, Vanessa caught wind of Jonathan's sleuthing and retaliated. She insisted he sign power of attorney forms, allowing her to handle some upcoming investments, framing it as a way to simplify his busy schedule. When he hesitated, she raged, throwing accusations and threats. "You don't trust me," she shouted one evening in their opulent living room. "Why did you marry me if you can't give me the freedom to help run our affairs?" Jonathan's patience wore thin. "I married you because I thought we had something special," he retorted. "Now I'm not so sure." Her eyes flashed with hatred. She stormed off, slamming the door, and didn't return that night. But Jonathan wasn't alone. He spent hours calling contacts and scanning financial statements. The deeper he dug, the clearer the picture became. Vanessa was a fraud, a con artist who specialized in ensnaring wealthy men. During this tumultuous period, Elizabeth settled into motherhood, focusing on baby James. Despite her heartbreak, she found profound joy in caring for her son. Late-night feedings and lullabies replaced the noise of tabloids and gossip. She made a point of never speaking ill of Jonathan to James, and she filed away the heartbreak in a locked chamber of her heart. When she felt strong enough, she instructed her lawyer to finalize the custody and visitation terms with Jonathan's legal team. She wanted James to know his father, provided Jonathan could be responsible. One afternoon, a courier arrived at Elizabeth's door with an envelope addressed to her. She opened it carefully, finding a thick wad of legal documents from Jonathan's lawyer. At the top was a note scribbled by Jonathan himself. "Elizabeth, I owe you an apology. You were right about Vanessa. Please look at these documents. I want to ensure James and you are protected. Let's discuss custody arrangements in person. Jonathan skimming through the pages, Elizabeth learned that Jonathan had begun divorce proceedings against Vanessa, citing fraud and emotional distress. He was also reorganizing his assets to ensure Vanessa couldn't claim a share of his core business holdings. A sense of relief washed over her, knowing that the truth was finally emerging. But it wasn't over yet. Vanessa unleashed a final hailstorm of vengeance once she realized Jonathan planned to divorce her. She went public with salacious tales, painting Jonathan as an abusive manipulator who had cast her aside. She threatened to sue for a massive alimony settlement, claiming she'd given up her career to be at his side. She even claimed to be pregnant, though nobody could verify it. The tabloids ate it up, and Jonathan's reputation wavered. His shareholders grew anxious. The stock price for one of his newer ventures dipped. That was the moment Elizabeth decided to act. She might have moved on from Jonathan romantically, but she had no desire to watch him be destroyed, especially when it might hurt her son's future. She reached out to a trusted journalist, Sarah Donovan, an old acquaintance who had interviewed Jonathan years ago. Elizabeth handed over the files incriminating Vanessa, the forged signatures, the false business claims, testimonies from past victims. She explained the entire sordid saga on the condition that Sarah would wait for court validation before publishing. In a high-stakes courtroom showdown, Jonathan's legal team presented overwhelming evidence against Vanessa. Lawyers brought forth witnesses, former partners, private investigators who spoke of her deceitful tactics. Financial forensics revealed shell corporations used to launder stolen funds. Each exhibit was a nail in the coffin of Vanessa's carefully curated image. Furious, Vanessa screeched about defamation and sabotage, but the judge found her statements inconsistent and her credibility in tatters. When the final gavel struck, the court ruled in Jonathan's favor. The marriage was declared null due to fraudulent circumstances. Vanessa was ordered to pay restitution for any assets proven to be stolen or misrepresented. As she was escorted out by court security, the paparazzi captured her meltdown, eyes wild, hair disheveled, cursing Jonathan and Elizabeth in a venomous tirade. The next day's headlines read, "Fraudulent Mistress Exposed, Jonathan Harrington Free of Con Artist Bride." For Jonathan, the aftermath was a bitter relief. He had lost credibility in many circles, but the truth had come out. He also realized the depth of the pain he'd inflicted on Elizabeth. After the dust settled, he called her and asked to see baby James. She agreed to a meeting at a cozy cafe near the hospital where James was born. When Jonathan arrived, he found Elizabeth waiting with James dozing in a stroller. The hush of the cafe and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee gave the encounter a subdued warmth. Jonathan quietly sat across from Elizabeth, eyes dropping to the baby. Guilt and regret lined his face. "How is he?" Jonathan asked, voice thick. Elizabeth smiled gently. "He's thriving, growing so quickly. He'll be crawling before we know it." Jonathan swallowed hard, guilt flooding him. "Liz, I'm sorry. I can't say it enough. I was a fool." She studied him for a moment, then reached out to pat his hand. "Our marriage is over, Jonathan," she said, her tone honest, yet not unkind. "But that doesn't mean we can't work together to raise our son." He nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "Thank you for standing up for me in court. You could have let Vanessa destroy me." Elizabeth shook her head. "I did it for James. He deserves a future where his father isn't tied up in lawsuits and scandal. And part of me still respects the good man you used to be." Jonathan exhaled, relief and sorrow mingling. "I want to be that man again," he whispered, gently brushing his fingers over James's tiny hand. They spent the next hour discussing visitation schedules, financial planning for James's education, and how to navigate co-parenting. It wasn't an easy conversation. Emotions simmered beneath the surface: love, betrayal, regret. But there was also a mutual desire to provide the best life for their child. By the time they parted ways, Elizabeth felt a weight lift from her shoulders. They weren't returning to the life they had, but they were forging a new path, one grounded in honesty, if not love. Jonathan watched them go, a swirl of regret and admiration filling his heart. He knew he'd forever be marked by the choice he made to chase a fleeting thrill with Vanessa. And Elizabeth, for her part, walked away with her head held high, proud of the grace she maintained in the face of heartbreak. The next morning, newspapers displayed photos of a distraught Vanessa leaving the courthouse, overshadowed by articles praising Elizabeth's quiet dignity. Tabloid interest soon shifted to other scandals, leaving Jonathan and Elizabeth to navigate their complicated new reality in relative peace. Thus ended the whirlwind saga of betrayal, heartbreak, and deceit. Jonathan Harrington, once seduced by the allure of a cunning mistress, emerged bruised but wiser. Elizabeth, his pregnant wife left smiling on divorce day, had always known the truth, that Vanessa was a fraud waiting to be exposed. She stood her ground, protected her child, and refused to be a victim. In the end, Jonathan and Elizabeth found an uneasy truce, both determined to raise baby James in a stable environment. Their story became a cautionary tale, proving that no amount of wealth or glamour can mask a guilty conscience or hide deception forever. If you enjoyed this dramatic tale, please hit that like button, share this story with friends who love real-life drama, and subscribe to our channel for more gripping novels brought to life. Don't forget to leave a comment, sharing your favorite moment of the story.